Welcome to the Rundown. We're going to take a look at the recently failed peace talks aimed at bringing an end to the assault on Gaza and the different ways this could still play out. The assault on Gaza has now gone on for over 7 months, with an estimated death toll of at least 34,000, countless more still under the rubble, and hundreds of thousands displaced. Peace talks aimed at providing the Palestinians some reprieve were said to have progressed towards the final stages. Recently, the United Kingdom's current Foreign Secretary and previous Prime Minister David Cameron, along with the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, shared some words during their appearance at the WEF World Economic Forum Conference in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
It never pays to be optimistic on peace in this very difficult situation, but it does seem to me there is now, let's be frank, a pretty generous offer of sustained 40-day ceasefire, the release of potentially thousands of Palestinian prisoners in return for the release of these hostages who've now been in captivity for over 200 days. So I hope Hamas do take this deal, and frankly all the pressure in the world and all the eyes of the world should be on them today, saying take that deal. It will bring about this stop in the fighting that we all want to see so badly.
Listen to how Secretary of State Tony Blinken is talking about this potential ceasefire deal.
Hamas has before it a proposal that is extraordinarily generous on the part of Israel. And in this moment, the only thing standing between the people of Gaza and a ceasefire is Hamas.
Both nations had their diplomats out on tour to highlight and push for a potential ceasefire being offered by Israeli officials. The deal would have seen the release of 33 Israeli hostages in exchange for a ceasefire lasting just 40 days and the release of an unspecified number of Palestinian hostages. There was a lot of doubt that Hamas would take the offer, first and foremost because of the length of the ceasefire. Hamas had already expressed discontent with the proposed deal. Recently, the Palestinians celebrated Palestinian Prisoners' Day to honor the over 9,500 prisoners and hostages still being kept in Israel. In an Amnesty International report, of the 9,500 prisoners, 200 are children and 40% are held without charge or trial. Many have reported torture, starvation, and other horrible tactics being used on them. Yet Prime Minister Netanyahu had already declared that regardless of the outcome of the negotiations, the IDF would not be restricted and would proceed with their planned invasion of Rafah.
As negotiators entered a second day of talks in Egypt, Hamas and the Israeli government suggested that a limited ceasefire and the release of some Israeli hostages were achievable aims. Yet any optimism previously expressed soon evaporated. Speaking for the first time about these talks, the Israeli Prime Minister said their opponents' expectations were unacceptable.
While Israel showed willingness, Hamas remained entrenched in its extreme positions, and on top of it, their demand that we withdraw all our forces from the Strip, end the war, and leave Hamas intact. The state of Israel cannot accept this.
On Monday, May 6th, Israel ordered citizens in the southern city of Rafah to begin evacuating, seemingly signaling the invasion would soon commence. This enraged the domestic population of Israel out of fear that the bombardment would impact their loved ones. Thousands took to the streets to protest the government and demand peace talks take place, and that the government prioritize the release of hostages.
For many thousands of Israelis, the unacceptable thing here is their prime minister. They think he's got his priorities wrong, stalling on a deal to get back the hostages as he sets about eliminating Hamas.
Basically, the Israeli people are hostages to the right-wing government. The people of Gaza are hostages to the Hamas, and basically there has to be a way to overcome that.
Meanwhile, Israeli officials scattered, trying their best to obfuscate and convince the public that it was in fact Hamas that either refused the deal or asked for things that were just far too unreasonable in their eyes. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, for example, claimed it was Hamas that would not accept the deal. Further to his right, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who both have Netanyahu in a coalition government largely dependent on their support, had threatened to topple the government if the invasion did not proceed as promised.
Visiting troops in the central Gaza Strip, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant indicated that he agrees with the protesters.
There are concerning signals that Hamas is not planning to accept any deal or agreement with us. This means an operation in Rafah and in the entire Gaza Strip in the very near future.
Israel is moving ahead with our operation to target Hamas in Rafah. We will, as usual, be making every effort to move civilians out of harm's way as we have done in the past. We believe that we've destroyed at least 18 or 19 of Hamas's 24 battalions, but the 4 battalions which remain in Rafah cannot be shielded from Israel. They will be attacked.
Thus, Israel began its bombardment of Rafah, signaling to the hundreds of thousands of refugees that they would now need to once again seek new shelter. The UN has said that so far nearly 800,000 Palestinians have been displaced since Israel launched its offensive. Countless protesters remain in the streets of Tel Aviv, demanding the resignation of Netanyahu, with many claiming he does not in fact have the safety of the hostages as his primary objective. In mid-December, the Israeli army killed 3 hostages who were waving a white flag and screaming for help in Hebrew, leading many to believe the current modus operandi makes it difficult to ensure the safety of the hostages.
A global chorus is demanding an end to this offensive because it has killed many thousands of Palestinians. But the shooting of 3 Israeli hostages by mistake could sway Israeli opinion in ways that over 2 months of bombing never could. The 3 hostages were all in their 20s and carrying a stick with a makeshift white flag, but a soldier shouted terrorist and shot 2 of them. The 3rd was killed moments later, despite shouting in Hebrew for help.
Benny Gantz, a member of the Israeli Knesset and current Israeli War Council, has demanded a post-war Gaza plan by June 8, or he would collapse the government currently held together by a coalition.
אם תעדיף את הלאומי על האישי ותבחר ללכת בדרכם של הרצל, בן גוריון, בגין ורבין, תמצא בנו שותפים למאבק. אבל אם תבחר ללכת בדרכם של קנאים ותוביל את האומה כולה אל תהום, נאלץ לפרוש מהממשלה.
He has offered his own plan, which would require the dismantling of Hamas, the release of all hostages, and establishing an international coalition with American, European, Arab, and Palestinian elements to oversee its civil affairs.
Unfortunately, this issue was not raised for debate, and worse, an alternative was not raised in its replacement. Indecision is in essence a decision. This leads to a dangerous course, which promotes the idea of Israeli military and civilian governance in Gaza. This is a negative and dangerous option for the state of Israel strategically, militarily, and from a security standpoint.
With the looming threat of a collapsed government, which would make Netanyahu vulnerable to his legal troubles. The first, focusing on Netanyahu and his wife having received lavish presents from wealthy individuals in return for political favors. Fraud and breach of trust carry a prison sentence of up to 3 years, while bribery charges carry a sentence of up to 10 years in jail and/or a fine. The second, having to do with the negotiations with Israel's leading daily, Yediot Aharonot, for favorable coverage in exchange for legislation that would slow the growth of a rival newspaper. And the third having to do with Netanyahu granting regulatory favors to Israel's leading telecommunications company, Bezek Telecom Israel, in return for positive coverage of him and his wife on a news website controlled by Bezek's former chairman. On May 20th, Karim Khan of the International Criminal Court announced that the organization would be seeking the arrest warrants of a number of individuals, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israeli Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant, and 3 high-ranking Hamas members: head of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed al-Masri, commander-in-chief of the military wing of Hamas, and Ismail Haniyeh, head of Hamas Political Bureau. It's worth noting the US, China, Russia, Israel, and many other nations are not signatories of the Rome Statute, which established the ICC. This does not preclude a nation from facing consequences, as any nation who has signed, in this case Palestine in 2015, would still be protected. Meanwhile, the US has a specific law which requires the invasion of The Hague if they are forced to face consequences at The Hague, which has been dubbed the Hague Invasion Act. As the assault on Gaza continues, Netanyahu feels the pressure both domestically from his left, with Benny Gantz demanding a plan by a certain date, and from his right by the anti-Arab Kahanis Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who demands an escalation and total domination of remaining lands. Thousands remain in the streets demanding his resignation, and now the highest international legal body, the International Criminal Court, has declared they would seek his arrest warrant.
Of course, we see pictures of starving children, of emaciated children. We have a variety of evidence to support, not polemics, but evidence that's been forensically analysed to sustain the charge also of starvation being used by Netanyahu and Gallant as a method of war. And it's awful that in 2024 we have had to submit these applications to the judges of the ICC for warrants.
US officials immediately made it clear that not only would they not respect the warrants, the entire effort was anti-Semitic, and it was offensive to equate Hamas to the Netanyahu government. Meanwhile, France and Germany surprisingly said they would respect the warrants in an effort to bolster the legitimacy of the International Court. In a surprising move, Ireland, Norway, and Spain announced they would soon recognize a Palestinian state.
In a coordinated move this morning, the leaders of all 3 countries announced they will formally recognize a Palestinian state on May 28th. 143 UN member countries recognize Palestine as a state. The U.S. is not one of them. Speaking earlier, the Irish Prime Minister said the move was long overdue and an important step to achieving peace in the Middle East.
Today, Ireland, Norway and Spain are announcing that we recognise the state of Palestine. I've spoken with a number of other leaders and counterparts, and I'm confident that further countries will join us in taking this important step in the coming weeks. We do so because we believe in freedom and justice as the fundamental principles of international law.
Which is also an effort constantly blocked by the US veto on the Security Council, whereas the General Assembly is non-binding.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 143. Against, 9. Abstentions, 25.
Will those in favor of the draft resolution please raise their hand? Those against? Abstentions? The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council.
Prime Minister Netanyahu is like an anxious animal backed up against a wall with threats coming at him from almost every direction. There's no telling what sort of desperate choice he might make. The ICJ has just issued new orders as a result of South Africa's case against Israel. The court has ordered Israel to immediately halt its operations in Rafah and allow UN fact-finding missions into Gaza, declining to fulfill South Africa's request to order a halt to all military operations.
The state of Israel shall immediately halt its military offensive and any other action which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that would bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part.
The IDF has already made it clear nothing would stop them, and no legal body would influence their decisions. Stick with us for more updates. The bombardment continues, and yet journalists are not allowed on the ground, so it's getting even more difficult to try and find fair and accurate coverage. We're going to try our best, so I hope you stay tuned for our videos. Thanks for stopping by, and be sure to subscribe.